Hello.
Hi, everybody.
Kayla Lords.
John Brownstone.
Of Loving BDSM, where we help kinksters like you have happy, healthy power exchange relationships. One of the ways to have a happy, healthy anything is to be as safe as possible, but to also know that no matter how safe you are, things will happen. And they will not go as planned. And what are you going to do when that happens? We have talked a lot in the past about safety and risk assessment and, understanding that every part of BDSM carries risk.
That's true.
One thing we have not talked about, and this entire video came about after you mentioned something in a podcast episode.
Yeah.
Your number one thing that would be in any toy bag you put together, regardless of your kinks, is a BDSM first aid kit.
Yeah, this came about from somebody that I follow on FET. They asked the question, what would be your top thing in your toy bag? People were responding, paddle, this flogger, that flogger, crops, canes, all different implements. And I'm looking at this and they're all good answers. I mean,
Sure.
where the intention of a toy bag is to have fun. But the one thing that struck me as I'm going through people's answers, one thing I noticed is that nobody said anything about a first aid kit. Me being me, I threw in my 2 cents and, need to have a first aid kit. That's the first thing I'd have.
Well, that's funny because that's not an incorrect answer. A lot of ears perked up in the podcast when you said that. But I'm not going to lie, that's not something I think about. Now, granted, I kind of do that thing of, I don't have to think about it, I have you. But I think that most people don't think about that. When they think about their toy bag, they think about the fun stuff they're going to do with it.
Sure.
And there's nothing wrong with that, obviously.
No, obviously not. I mean, we're all here to have fun. That's what this is all about.
But what gets forgotten in that is that things can go wrong. And what are you going to do when things go wrong? We're going to give you some ideas of what should be in your BDSM first aid kit. So the first thing to realize is that it doesn't have to necessarily be the white box with the red lettering that says first aid on it, unless that's what you need.
Yeah. I mean, that's an easy way to do it. You can go to pretty much any pharmacy, any big box store, and walk into the pharmacy area and get yourself a pre-made first aid kit.
That probably won't have everything you need, but it might.
No, but it's a start.
It's a start. You can also just find a container you have at home and shove everything in it. You can just use a pocket or a part of your existing toy bag.
Yeah. I just had a thought. What would work nice is one of those little shaving bags.
There you go. So let's talk about what needs to be in it. Now, there are some universals I think that are just good for any first aid kit, but I think it is a good idea to think about how you're going to be playing, because that may lead you to put some things in your kit that somebody else might not necessarily need. Here we go. The first thing, Band-Aids, Neosporin, iodine, betadine wipes for broken skin.
Yep, that's the main thing right there. Another good item to add to that is something called new skin, or what some people may generically call liquid bandage. I use it in the shop. I'm always getting cuts and scrapes, and it's just a little tiny little spray bottle, and you just take it, spray it over. It seals the cuts, and it's waterproof. It lasts for several days on your skin.
I always forget about that. Thank goodness you don't. And you have to think about, well, when could you get broken skin? Actually, in almost any kink. Impact play can break skin.
Sure.
Needle play certainly breaks skin. Knife play can break skin, even if you did not intend for it to break skin.
In lieu of Band-Aids, you might want to include some gauze pads and some first aid tape.
Yep. Anything to seal, close, or otherwise protect an open wound of any sort.
Right.
And that won't just be for things like cuts. If you get a blister, if you get a rash or a burn, you might want to cover it up and protect it until you can get home or whatever you need to do.
Yep.
The next thing to consider is burn cream and or aloe. Cream, gel, fluid of some sort.
Sure, that comes in handy. If you're doing rope play, not that you set out to get a rope burn,
Yeah, nobody
as a
nobody
bottom.
minds that.
Nobody, really sets out to do
Unless
that.
you're
But
a real masochist.
well,
Not gonna lie.
yeah. But it can happen. You want to have something like that. Candle wax. You're playing with candle wax. If it's too hot, it can cause some irritation to the skin. Absolutely. So having some kind of cream or lotion like that to put on the skin. Even in some cases, some people after impact play, after a very hard spanking,
there are people who do well with an ointment or a cream to help with their bruises and their marks.
Yes, so even for that, it's helpful to have some of that on hand. Aloe cream is the first to come, to mind. There are some other options out there.
And these days, you can sometimes find soothing creams for marks and bruises, especially after impact play, from a sex toy shop, from a BDSM shop, because they understand that that's part of it too.
Yeah.
So some sort of soothing cream, whether it's for a burn or mark or something that can be massaged into the skin to help it feel a little bit better. Next, an ACE bandage or brace. This could be for ankles, knees, wrists, any joint of the body that could get thrown off when you're getting a little wild in your scene.
Yeah. An ACE bandage would probably really be overall your best bet.
Sure.
Because with an ACE bandage, you can pretty much do anything from knees, wrists, ankles, whatever you need to.
But if you have a pre-existing knee condition, maybe you wear your knee brace when you run, but now you might be doing something a little bit more physical in your scene. Pack your knee brace. You might need it when you're done.
That's true. So, these are all good things to have on hand.
Next, and I know it's one of your favorites, you actually don't keep it in the bag except for transport.
Right.
And these are safety scissors or safety rope cutters for rope, bondage tape, or anything that gets wrapped around the body.
Absolutely. There is nothing worse than doing a rope scene, whether it's floor bondage or suspension, and there is a problem and you need to get your bottom out of that rope quickly. Safety scissors at the bare minimum. And you can go all the way up to lots of different types of safety knives that are designed for cutting ropes. Some of these cutters are even to the point that they are for cutting your seatbelt. If you get in a car accident, you have a way to slice out of your seatbelt.
Oh, okay.
So these things are pretty hefty, to the point that even if you're in some kind of strap bondage, you can cut that and get a person out of that quickly.
And we keep it in our bag, but when we're playing rope, where are your scissors?
In the very beginning, I used to have them off to the side of where I was tying. Sometimes the point of going to some of these workshops, I learned a neat little trick. And I got myself a retractable lanyard that clips onto, my pants or belt pocket. And those shears are always right by my side to grab at a moment's notice. There's nothing worse than you're tying somebody, on the bed, and your shears are on the nightstand, and you're doing they're just out of reach, you're just out of reach. Nope, they're right here on the belt within reach. It's a retractable lanyard, so you can just zip them out and do what you need to do.
That's one of the items, that's a safety first aid kit item that you want with you the whole time, whereas the other things you just want close enough by that you can grab if they're needed.
Right.
And in some cases, you might not know these things are needed until you get to the aftercare portion of your scene. Sometimes something will go wrong right in the middle, and you need it at least close by.
Yeah.
The last thing that it's not really first aid, but it could be, depending on how somebody reacts to a scene, is a blanket and or some other comfort item. So I know I have had the experience with really intense scenes, even if they were not physically intense, but they were emotionally intense. I've come out of a scene and just trembled from head to toe.
Yeah.
And you don't just wrap your arms around me when it's nice. You always make sure you put a blanket around me in
Right.
case I've gotten a chill, in
Right.
case I'm cold, just something to comfort me, something soft, something that works for me until I can calm down and kind of come back to myself. Everybody's item, whether it's a blanket or a comfort item, will be a little bit different. This
Sure.
is something you would want to discuss
Even
in
a stuffy.
aftercare negotiations. Like, what do you think might work for you if you are kind of out of yourself beyond the scene? Like, we've had scenes where I'm so far gone in subspace, I can't keep my eyes open, I can't
Right.
speak, I can't hold my body up, and you've got to do something to keep me safe while you're cleaning up, while you're waiting for me to come back to myself, just to be on the lookout for me to make sure I'm not somehow going into shock. That
Sure.
I don't think is a common thing that happens to
No.
people, but it can, depending on
the-
the kind of scene you have.
Right. And the thing is, when you're having a scene and, especially as a bottom, you hear people talk about subspace. Not everybody goes to subspace. You don't hit it all the time. But there are a lot of different things going on in your body at that time, between adrenaline, was it dopamine? A lot of different chemicals being released in the body that account for everything that's going on. So once it's over and your body starts returning to normal, getting a chill, some people may feel hot. Everybody reacts differently, but it's possible to get a chill, and having a nice soft blanket to wrap somebody in can go a long way.
Yep. Some things I would have nearby that aren't necessarily first aid kit kind of things, like you would not just store them in your bag or in a box necessarily. Water. If you're at home, this is really easy. Just have a glass of water on your dresser or a nightstand. If you're playing in the club or at a play party, they should have that kind of thing, bottled water. If either of you know that you need a little snack or something to munch on because you've used a ton of energy.
Sure.
I mean, I'm not saying it's exactly like this, but some intense scenes can feel like you just ran a marathon in about 30 minutes.
Yes.
So having food nearby, if you have an appetite at all, some people post-scene won't have an appetite. Water is almost always a good idea.
Sure.
I would probably recommend laying off really heavy foods until you're kind of back to yourself, and anything like alcohol or a depressant until you're sort of back to yourself. But water is pretty much universally a good thing to have nearby on hand, not necessarily in your first aid kit, but something you can grab very quickly.
Sure.
Especially since in some scenes they are pretty active, and even whether it's mental, emotional, or physical. And I know sometimes I sweat through my clothes if I'm wearing any through a scene, as do you. And so even something like Gatorade or something that can replenish electrolytes just to kind of help you
is important
in the recovery process. And some people will need that more than others. If you have underlying health conditions where your blood sugar drops or you get dehydrated easily, this is even more important for you post-scene.
Some people, and there again too, everybody's different. Some people like some chocolate to nibble on after a scene, something high protein. Cheese.
I'm a cheese and salami or pepperoni
cheese,
girl.
salami, pepperoni, anything like that. A lot of people, especially if you're playing at a club, will bring party trays of these things.
Kinksters love to feed one another.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they
but
do.
it's also part of the post-scene recovery.
Yes.
And something can go wrong in the middle of the scene where everything was fine, but maybe your blood sugar dropped. Maybe you did get dehydrated because you haven't had enough pre-scene, and you've got to stop everything because you're in distress. And part of what brings you back or helps you recover from that is having plenty of water or some Gatorade or something to nibble on. So again, that's not something you can shove in your first aid kit, but it is something that you want to have handy when you can. So that, I think, is all that we could think of. That does not mean that's all that should be in your first aid kit.
That's not the given.
Right.
But it's a good start.
And if you play with certain kinks more than others and have seen certain risks, there may be certain first aid items that you might need that we did not mention here. And so I invite you to please share some other ideas for your BDSM first aid kit in the comments below so that we can all learn from one another. We play at home so often. All of these things are in our bathroom, which is attached to our bedroom. So we don't have necessarily a special kit. Another good thing to know is if you are going to a dungeon or club, they usually have one, maybe two first aid kits and plenty of supplies. But it's not a bad idea to keep those things in your toy bag or as a separate kit so that no matter what, you're covered, no matter where you're playing or how you're playing. But yeah, share what you think should be in a BDSM first aid kit down in the comments.
Please do.
And that is it for us this time. If you enjoyed this, please give us a thumbs up. If you want more of it, please consider subscribing.
And after you subscribe, ring that notification bell to get updates of new content.
Just do what Daddy says. And if you want to help us make more of this and get some good stuff like live streams and podcast episodes and Discord server, oh my, you can join us on Patreon, patreon.com/KaylaLords. Bye.
Bye.